Now, if we look at it by hospital, it's quite interesting to look at. And there's quite a jumbled mess here because we can look at a series of hospitals, what their net patient revenue is per discharge, what their contractual allowance is per on a percentage basis, and what their revenue is um, on an aggregate basis. And so let's look at a few states to see how this pans out. And so one of the states I like to look at is Texas. Um, so if we put in Texas here, for example, one of the things that we'll see in our map is that Texas certainly has a lot of hospitals, but when we go down to a city, like let's say we want to choose Houston, which um, is a hub for healthcare. When we look at this, then obviously we get a map of all of the locations where we have data for. And then you can see essentially where your net patient revenue per discharge is. And so for example, Victory Medical Center in Houston has the most patient revenue per discharge. And so for every discharge, the revenue that's coming in is 64%. Likewise, if you look at UT Anderson Cancer Center, then you can see the trend below of the discharge trend and the net patient revenue per discharge, which is quite high because in 2011 it was 33,000 and now the revenue is 44,000. So it increases drastically. Um, then you can look at certainly a series of other hospitals and kind of understand what their net patient revenue is per discharge. Now, again, the net patient revenue is the amount that the hospital collects after the top line charge, but it's helpful to understand how this works. One of the things I did find very interesting is that on a contractual allowance percentage, some hospitals are better equipped than others in terms of contractual allowances. And so this Texas Doctors Hospital, which is a very, very small hospital, has a negative contractual allowance, which means that if I can think about this, what this means is that for everything that's coming in, they are actually receiving more than what that negotiating is. So my guess is that in this case, they are doing a lot in terms of Medicare and Medicaid and don't really deal with insurance companies as a whole. Now, certainly there are others in the list. So, for example, Houston Healthcare Medical Center is a big hospital, really in the center of Houston, and their net patient revenue and contractual allowance is 90%. And so, if you walk into this hospital, then you could expect your insurance provider to knock down the top line price by 90%. Something else that's very stark is that on a per adjusted discharge trend, revenue per adjusted discharge, it goes from 12,000 in 2019 to 25,000 in 2022. So in 5 years, it increased by more than 2 times or more than 100%, which is quite stark. Um, Another one is like it's interesting because you can see where it's located, where Houston Northwest is, and then its trend. And so you will see that it's been trending around $10,000 per discharge, and then it came up to $14,000. So not as big as Houston Healthcare, but still very, very large. We can do this with a series of other hospitals, but I wanted to show you specifically what this means for hospitals when it comes to contractual allowances. I encourage you to come and look at this analysis because it's very helpful in understanding what hospitals you're looking at and what discharges you have. And so let's say in my area in Dallas, for example, if I look in Dallas, then I can look at a lot of different hospitals, which Baylor is certainly one of them. But the one that has a high net patient revenue per discharge is UT Southwestern. Interestingly enough, their discharges have come down since 2017. And so I look at the data to see why is that the case. Dallas downtown certainly has a high revenue per discharge, but then you also have to look at, on the other end, you have to look at allowances by hospital to understand what their contractual allowances are and why contractual allowances are so high. So I encourage you to come and take a look at this analysis at the hospital level, because the data is quite interesting, and I think there's a lot to glean from the data in terms of what it means in terms of a specific hospital and their overall trend.